Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott skill
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello, and welcome back to Lost Signals Reviews Literature. I am Chris Morgan. I am here with my business associates, Stephen Hermosi.
Aloha.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Vonnegut endorses Andrew Yang.
And Scott Thurlow.
Smash all machines.
And today we are reviewing or discussing Kurt Vonnegut's 1952 novel, Player Piano. And I actually chose this. There you go. And I've got my copy right here. The reason I chose this is because I read it the first time I was in college at a political science class. And I think, as I was telling Scott and Ian precast, I believe he to be a proto-progressive. This guy was basically, if you combine Noam Chomsky and probably Kurt Vonnegut, you had this professor. And he had us read this and Last Hurrah. And this book has been one of my favorite books. And I think it is one of those things that becomes more relevant every year. And as somebody who, as of last week, got placed on temporary layoff, this book has...
I'm sorry, Chris, your punch card no longer...
Machines rejected your punch card, buddy.
Yeah. Seriously, it did. I tried to log on and it pretended like I loaned it money or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I think we're good. I'm hoping that everybody finds this as timely as we do. And Scott, do you have a funny log line?
Well, I don't know if it's funny, but I've come up with perhaps something relevant. Just meet the new boss, same as the old boss, i.e. machines.
Okay, computer.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Okay, computer. All right, and Steve-O, would you like to go ahead and tell us a little bit about the plot?
Sure. In the simplest terms possible, Dr. Paul Proteus is a well-to-do engineer in, I believe it's Ilium is the name of his town.
Yes.
And, you know, there's just, it's like post-World War III, I guess. Shortly after this near future for 1952 or whenever it was written.
World of tomorrow, today.
Yeah, future exactly. So kind of everything is being run by machines, which are, you know, made more and more, or humans are being made more and more obsolete every day by the advances that they're making with machines. And Proteus or Paul, the main character, kind of realizes that he is has become disillusioned with this world, tries to convince other people, specifically his wife, to kind of step away from it, but instead is kind of forced into this situation. Yeah, a situation where he has to either be with the rebellion or be with the, you know, people that love the machines, and chooses rebellion, and things go somewhat poorly for him. And I mean, that's kind of the long and the short of it. There's a lot of other characters involved and things like that, but that's the basic plot.
Oh, you forgot about the Shah, though.
I did forget about the Shah. And like, you know what? I know that that's an important part of this book, but was something that I was constantly forgetting about while I was reading it. That it even that's such a secondary plot to me.
It's somewhat of an anticlimactic arc for him, but we'll get to it later, I guess. But it is included in there. Like, it's sort of like cut up between Proteus' story as a protagonist and other characters who live and exist in the world, who sort of like encapsulate slices and vignettes of Vonnegut's vision of, you know, the mechanization of jobs and of the disillusionment of the people, like by and large, the masses, if you will, with being basically made obsolete, as you said, Steve-O. So.
Right. So,
given all that,
at this thought, we could have said, "Welcome, my son. Welcome to the machine."
Damn it! We should have done
Oh man,
you didn't think of that earlier, buddy.
I have no idea.
That's the best one, sure. But yeah.
So I think that the arc of Dr. Proteus,
Yep.
yes, is actually fascinating because they do kind of. Vonnegut developed his. Yeah, I mean, he's part of the machine. He is a high-ranking leader in this world who is set up to move upwards, and it's believable his discontentment and his basically being led to the revolutionary stance.
Yeah.
So I think that Vonnegut sells his motivations very well throughout the entire work, and also I think handles very well this development of this world and making people on the different sides of the river in a way.
Literally in some cases.
Different sides of the tracks, if you want to take an actual like American term for that, the haves and have-nots, and both a look at. I mean, I'm going a little bit of the themes here, but the idea of the mob mentality that develops when oppressed by elites, and I don't know. I just think overall, I think it's handled fairly well. Again, I've read a bunch of Vonnegut, so I have to compare this work against other Vonnegut works, and I think this is his first novel.
Yeah.
So I think you can see where he's going, and he's one of my favorite authors. So perhaps it's not my favorite Vonnegut novel, but I enjoyed the journey he took us on.
Yeah, so it sounds like you might be giving a 2, a very strong 2.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the same camp. Like, yes, it's a very well done and plotted out tale, and it shows different facets of the characters, which we'll get to as well, and the motivations, and his his near vision of the future, as one of his Zerus sort of future vision that takes place, in which he's going to address all the themes and sort of symbolism and allegories and so forth that are there. But not even but. Given all that, I think it's perfectly fine. It moves along. It's paced really nicely. I think it sort of flip-flops back and forth, switches back and forth between various slices of a day in the life of a person who lives on the other side of the track, day in the life of the person, the wife of a high-ranking member, day in the life of this and that. So I think it all creates a nice, very organic world in which is believable and you can get into and follow along with. I don't know if it's super strong, like even without like trying to compare it directly to other Vonnegut works, which yes, I do enjoy better or think it's more fleshed out because this was his first major one. But all that to say that I think the plot in Player Piano is at least easily good enough for a 2. Could be convinced of a 3, but strong 2 is where I'm gonna stand for now.
Steve-O?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I think I'm gonna probably come down on a 2. Like you have both said, I've read several other Vonnegut books. I wouldn't say because he's written he read a ton of books, but so I wouldn't say I've read the majority of his books, but I've read 4 or 5 of them other than this one before I read this one, and
I think
it's a good
majority of them.
It's a good plot, but you can tell that he figured out his craft a bit more as time went on, and I like this, but I'm going to give it a 2 just because I think that it could have the whole and maybe you guys will prove me wrong on this or bad me, but the whole Shah story arc could have not even been there, and I think the story would have been basically the same for it.
It wouldn't have changed all that much, but I'm saying it is nice world building, but you're right, like what is the payoff in that plot line? It's not quite as strong as others.
I feel like it's an attempt to show an outside perspective of what's going on here, but it didn't really pay off for me all that well. So
I'll tell you.
I'm going to say that narratively, I agree with you guys. I'm going to give it a 2 as well. The shot story, I understand why it was there. Maybe not all the dots were connected as strongly, and maybe that has something to do with this being his first novel. But there's other things like the barber and the soldiers on the train who are playing poker, and the conversation out at Cornell about the whole football. But they all brought up great points during them. I just felt like they took a while to get to their points and really lost something in the pacing. Like especially Cornell. I mean, he really nailed the whole, well, you can have an education or you can be an athlete, but you can't really do both. I mean, this way,
No, no.
he really cut to the center and said, no, you can do one or the other. You can't do both. And I thought he brought up some great points, especially like, when it comes to as in Rising Saga and Crystal always talk about with like working class people, most of the military recruitments are for like working class poor neighborhoods. So you had a bunch of working class people being on a train, being part of the military. Actually, I think at one point somebody suggests, well, at least as a rec. Oh, great! So what are they called?
The Rex and Reeks.
The Rex and Reeks. That, well, if all else fails, I can just join the military. And the barber, I thought his story was the most amusing, but had the least amount of point to it. So what I'm saying is all these,
It was just a vignette, like to give you a slice of life and spend 5 minutes in the shoes of this person in this
from
world.
The outside perspective type of
Yeah, but I think he spent too much time not getting to his point in those areas. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the book, but by the same token, I think narratively it really deserves it too.
You also see in his later works, he discarded this kind of framework. So I think that Vonnegut himself looked back and said, perhaps this wasn't as effective.
Yeah, it was, like you said, it was him honing his craft, so it's still an early iteration of that.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm sticking with the 2, but I think that's perfectly solid.
2's around.
All right, great. And Ian, would you like to tell us the themes?
Well,
sit back, son.
Vonnegut is well known for being working with irony, working with kind of very
modern-day satirist.
A very ironic near future worlds in order to comment on the current one. And in this one, he's taking on automation and many facets of automation, both from what's interesting is the point of view of the ruling elite, but also different types of revolutionaries in the situation, whether you have the people who are the followers, the idea of the martyrs, the idea of the messiahs, and the false messiahs in certain ways, the idea of propping up an individual to be the leader, not based on actual value, but based on symbolism there. The faults of kind of the saboteurs and Luddites as they go forward to destroy the machines. Complacency of individuals who want revolution until revolution happens and they return to things because they don't want to lose the comforts. And we can see that very well today. The fact that people are unhappy, but they're more afraid of what is to follow. It's in a sense the slow decay of complacency. But what I really want to talk about is this is actually an interesting commentary on certain thing in our politics today, which is that a man named Andrew Yang and a man named Bernie Sanders were running for president for the Democratic nomination. And Andrew Yang was calling for a universal basic income in order to take on issues with the rise of automation in modern era, the second or third industrial revolution, if you will, where Bernie Sanders was promoting a work guarantee. In this world, they have a work guarantee through the Reclamation Corps. And Vonnegut's pointing out the flaws of, in a sense, so Sanders' argument is that you need to give people a sense of purpose, and that having the federal government guarantee employment for people will be a better situation for dealing with automation. Vonnegut shows a world where people are discontent with that because there's no upward.
They don't feel needed or necessary.
Exactly, and that would be even worse under universal basic income. So what's interesting is that I've always been on the kind of more side of the works guarantee, but Vonnegut here shows a really good deconstruction of why that doesn't necessarily work, and the fact that I don't know, it's very, I think, pertinent, perhaps even more to this day than it was when it was written, or at least it were an eternal recurrence that all the same issues still exist. But instead of having vacuum tubes, we're now looking at quantum computing and microprocessors as our great foils. But anyway, I think that that is one of the theme that I can draw to match our current era.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. The themes are deep and tangled, and yes, are perhaps more relevant than might have any right to be at this point, given the length of time between this book being published and the situation we find ourselves in now. And yeah, like the societal, the class division, certainly, and all that, as related to, again, there's some like unnamed, like it's implied heavily that there was some big Third World War, and then in the wake of that, America, like specifically, rolled up those sleeves and pulled up the know-how, and now we can solve every problem by automation, and all the machines do everything, and we need the engineers and the managers, the programmers to be the ones who lead everything. Everyone else is sort of like fallen by the wayside. So yeah, like I think it explores a lot of that stuff, like many issues, sub issues related to those topics, without really offering any answers. Even the revolution itself is like rocky and iffy and has like fissures in it, divisions in it.
Well, what's interesting is I believe there's a lot of dialogue where it's easy to ask questions, it's hard to come up with solutions.
Yeah,
I think Kroger says that at a point.
Yeah, for sure. So like again, like it throws all the stuff at you, like with offering like some commentary on each of it, but without saying, never committing to any one answer over another, because there might not actually be one, right? And it's a messy, like humanity is messy, like just in general, and especially related to those kind of technological advancements and concerns, like the march of civilization, or I think is a phrase used often in the novel. So
good. I was going to say, you guys bring up a lot of good points there, and I completely agree with you on those themes. But one I wanted to talk about was this idea of kind of the futility of the revolution or the rebellion, and the idea that this rebellion is named the Ghost Shirt Society after a failed Native American rebellion, where the idea was like, oh yeah, we have this shirt that's magically bulletproof, but obviously that's not true. And the entire thing of like Lasher at the end saying how he fully expected it to fail, and he was like, it was a 1 in 1,000 shot, but if we never took our chance, then we wouldn't have that 1 in 1,000 chance for it to succeed. And like all this like interesting stuff of like, even in failure, you drive the conversation forward, things like that. Like things that are as you were talking about, Ian, germane to the current situation, especially if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, despite the fact that he is not going to be the presidential nominee, he certainly drove the conversation and will still be in a position to change the way that things happen. And kind of that's kind of what they were. I think that's kind of what the end of this is saying. Like, the attempt is worthy, even if it doesn't succeed in everything that you were trying to do. Perhaps you
better than complacency,
some sort of change. And even if not, you put the question in other people's minds who can possibly make the next attempt or something like, like just these interesting things like that. I found it similar, or like I found myself thinking about those things in terms of the way things are going politically right now, and also in terms of like what was happening in like shortly after World War II when Vonnegut was writing this. He was a veteran, and that stuff was certainly very in his mind while he was writing, throughout his career, but especially in his first novel, like shortly off the heel, or somewhat shortly off the heels of like World War II and fighting and stuff like that. So like I don't know, I really like the way that Vonnegut writes. I think he's different than almost anyone else I've ever read, just in terms of his version and level of satire and like irony. And yeah, so like you could go into any of his books and find probably 10 themes at any given point, but that's the one that stuck out to me on this one.
I'm going to circle back to my original point, but speaking of the revolution, the thing I liked about the way the book ended is because it said so much with so very little. You have the whole true believers in the cause who have a realistic take on it, as you pointed out, Sibo. Better to have tried and failed than never to have tried at all, to at least bring it in the conversation. The point that immediately the people pick the one machine that's left working, the orange drink machine, and then try to repair it again and try to restore the machines.
Yeah.
Shows simultaneously the reliance upon the machines, but also the necessity for people to work on the machine, that there has to be some kind of happy medium. And I think he did a really, really, really great job of showing all the positives, the negatives, and the in-between. People who just want to fight for the sensationalistic aspect but don't really know what to do with themselves afterwards. People who are caught in the crossfire. And then, then you've got, Paul and Finnery and Lasher and who's the other guy? Yeah, the four guys all of a sudden are like, well, fuck this, we're turning ourselves in because so I really liked that. I think he did a really, really great job with regard to the revolution. Because as Scott and I were talking about this afternoon, now when you talk about like in current politics, burning one to start this revolution. Well, things the way our system is now, we have a flawed system, so everything's done through the bureaucratic process, and everybody gets freaked out if you try to draw outside the lines. And in this one, there isn't that establishment. I mean, it is a corporate run. It's a corporate run country, which you can arguably be. Ours very well could be.
Could be.
And what
I
we
think
could say,
the description of the president in this one is very fitting for the actual role of the president in society. People want a figure to make them feel comfortable, but they don't really have any power to control the actual movement of the country.
But unthreatening,
yeah. And so it's a very relevant book, and I think he does an excellent job of showing all the everything in like one chapter. He shows all the repercussions and touches
and all the facets.
In like a few pages. But when I read this, I had gotten an associate's degree from a community college in music, and then I worked for a couple of years, and I went back to all of our alma mater, Rutgers over here, and I was working on my bachelor's degree. And the first thing that struck me, it was the fact that everybody, if you even wanted to be a secretary in a company, you had to have a doctorate. I mean, it's just the reliance. He took the reliance on degrees to an absurd level.
Yeah, of course. He satirized it, obviously.
But the funny thing is, when we're speaking about somebody like, some ideals of Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders, it's just like, well, I remember Yang saying last summer that the United States or the country, we put such an effort on higher education, and that we have to redefine that because, we're discounting people who go to vocational schools. But, everybody's like, oh, I went to Harvard, whatever. But it's just like, yeah, but if people who go to vocational schools, their education is every bit as important as, if not more in some cases, than everybody else's.
Sure.
So I think this was a great, and he does discuss that in various ways in this book. He kind of divides it into three different categories for the most part. But I mean, I remember like right away when I read this book, as somebody who was going to get his bachelor's degree because his associate's in high school degree was not cutting it, I found that immediately amusing, and I found rereading it now, given the current political climate, is to be once again unnervingly, brilliantly ahead of its time. That this book was written, I can't do math, 60, 70 years ago?
About 70 at this point.
Yeah, about 70 at this point. I mean, how things have just become have stayed the same and changed, and have this book is the relevancy of this book with regard to even education is just, as I said before, even with regard to college sports. I mean, he nails it.
Yeah.
I do want to bring up one other topic, which is something to build off of what you just said, is that there's kind of a ideal in America of a meritocracy. And I think that this book shows a dystopian meritocracy.
Yes, true, yeah.
Which is, as a person in the graduate programs, I feel is, Vonnegut's critique is very real. The thing of how do we decide what's worthy of merit? And just because we have this kind of ideal of one person, and parts he's making about like the standardized testing of arbitrary standards of merit going forward to determine people's entire pathways in life. I absolutely agree with, and the reliance on like things like the SATs and
Other arbitrary tests
and all of those kind of things. It still plays a role in our society today. So I don't know. I mean, he deals with a lot of stuff that sadly turned out to be true.
Yeah, I mean, he juggles a lot of things. Like he shows the facets, both good, positive, negative, of many, many things of Americana, if you will, and just the possible future pathways, like you said, meritocracies, corporatocracies, etc. So yeah, he does a lot with in a short enough time span and space of space of actual physical plot. So I would hesitate to. I don't say you can give Vonnegut a 0 to themes of any of his novels, really. But this one, I think, again, like you guys all mentioned, is pretty spot on and very more relevant than it seems on the surface than ever for our current climate. So I'm giving it possibly the strongest one, but certainly a 1 for themes.
Yeah,
Agreed.
And as somebody who's like now replaying BioShock, when they went to the retreat on the island in the meadows and they had that passion play. I was just this is Andrew Ryan all over.
It's again. I think one of you said like his level and like method of doing parody and satire is very, very unique, and that was one of the standout scenes of that, Chris, for sure.
Absolutely.
So I agree. I'm giving it a 1, and that brings us to Scott with Antagonist.
We are our own enemy. Like it's kind of a tangled mess because that's what humanity is as a whole. So, like, of course, it's like you can ask if any character in this novel were real. You could ask them what's antagonizing you, and they give you a different answer to a degree. So it's like it's both internal struggles, like are we doing the right thing? Is our progress actually better for everyone, or is it like alienating people? Is it making people feel disillusioned, disassociated, making them feel sort of driftless because they don't have anything to stand by in a sense, or like to be respected, right? You're at this level, like you said, arbitrary testing now determines your entire life, your entire course. And if the machine spits out your card that you're going to the army, then that's it for you. Like you have no other recourse, you have no other avenue, and that's spiritually destroying your life. So I think it's very interesting. Like, and of course, like Dr. Proteus sort of encapsulates both sides of it, or he's sort of grown into inherited the good side, like the echelon, the upper echelon of the elite meritocracy who now rules and runs the world that they're in. But then he sees that it's sort of shallow and hollow to a degree and erodes people's humanity.
What's interesting is he almost faces a Kafka-esque bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah, exactly. Of which he is part of and has
not
built.
Written with the dark surreality of Kafka, but through kind of Mark Twain's tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, that's really well said.
Humor.
I like that.
With it. But it's still just the same side of different sides of the same coin of dealing with the oppressive state.
Yeah, exactly. So like, given all that, so all that to say, like, I'm not sure, like, certainly every character in this novel is antagonized to some degree by some kind of either internal or external societal pressure or psychological struggle. So I don't know I don't even think I can point to one thing, or even like as a amorphous generalization, as I often want to do for this question. But it's a mix of many elements that we just covered in plot and in themes. So I certainly think they're effective. I'm giving antagonists the question itself a 1, but I'm not sure what to label specifically X, Y, or Z as the quote unquote capital antagonist. So with that, go ahead.
I think I honestly look at this as there are, for any given character, there is one of two antagonists. It's either automation or humanity are your antagonists. And like, so for people in the, with the program, like Kroner and his bosses and, all of them, humanity is the real problem. Like trying to deal with Proteus because he's, they can't really nail him down, they can't predict him. They try as much as they can, and they get a lot right with like using automation for that. But in terms of Proteus, Infinity, Lasher, all those, the rebellious characters, automation is the enemy. And I think I think that both of them are very strong antagonists in this, like to the ones that they're antagonizing. Proteus's transformation seems to happen fairly early, and then he kind of like waffles around about it for most of the novel.
Well, it's implied like he's always had like a little kernel of like, he doesn't quite buy into the system fully, and that just becomes more and more unraveled.
And that's why Infinity is friends with him and is trying to recruit him because he saw that kind of spark that he could light up.
But like again, and also at the end, there's this other message of like, well, maybe Proteus is just doing this because he hates his father. But that's never really fully fleshed out. I think it's more of the automation versus humanity argument. I think they're both very strong antagonists to all the characters, and specifically to Proteus, the protagonist of the book. Automation makes the automation of society, of humanity, and in fact dehumanizes taking away of their humanity and the little errors that make them human is a good argument for a automaton antagonist, I guess, which I will give a 1 to.
What I found interesting, there was a part, I think it was in the Meadows, where he had a flashback to his father, and his father kind of seemed a little his father seemed to have gotten to the point in the game where he had hit an echelon, and I'm blocking the word which I wanted to use, but he all of a sudden seemed to be regretting his decisions. Like it's like the spirit of revolution or the spirit of asking questions in one conversation seemed to be put into Paul's head by his father. So everybody's viewing his dad as this captain of industry, and to Paul, it's just like this little spark that he put in, one time as a kid seemed to have, been more of an influence than everything else. Wow. And everything else you guys said, I agree with. I'm giving it a 1 as well. I just wanted to bring that little observation in since you brought it up, Steve.
Yeah, no, I like the division you made, Steve. Also, either way, I'm giving it a 1, but I like to sort of, it's not quite a simplification, but the dichotomy between those two things, I think works.
No, 1.
Okay, so it's on to me with protagonist. And our protagonist is Dr. Paul Proteus.
Dr. Paul Protagonist.
Dr. Paul Protagonist. And I thought he was an incredibly effective antagonist because
antagonist.
Did I say antagonist? Not protagonist.
Did
he was effectively an effective protagonist because he was simultaneously active and passive at the same time. Like he
flip flops. He pendulum swings back and forth between them.
Yeah, he was kind of like this observer at the same time, and he kind of saw where most people were coming from. He knew what he believed in, but was also kind of wanting to hunt out the truth of the situation. Like at the end when he's put on trial and he's on the lie detector machine, he becomes the voice of this revolution. He doesn't quite answer the way the revolution wants to, nor does he really answer the way the company wants to. He is very honest. He's kind of like his own person throughout. So we always talk about like unreliable narrators. I would say that he would be a very reliable protagonist. if we're going to.
Yeah, good call.
I think
Good
he was
call.
extremely well balanced. I think I think he was an extremely well balanced protagonist. Let's put it that way.
I think that they set him up really well early on with making kind of telling his entire story through the older mechanisms within the factory that the blinking light is, and eventually it's going to break.
No.
But it's not. It's that it's occasionally producing rejects now, and Proteus is certainly a cog within the machine that occasionally who points out a reject of what the machine wants him to do until and
like
it starts
that.
moving more and more and more until he becomes a figurehead of his resistance. And then, but he breaks from the machine entirely. So he got what he wanted, even though if it wasn't the glory that he wanted, he did find. I think early on he's talking about how he saw a former scientist or engineer who went to jail, and he's like, "Why?" He asked, "Why are you here?" And he goes, "Why aren't you here?"
Yeah.
And that's where he does end up in the fact that he broke from the machine, even if he had to be punished for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a very strong protagonist. Very, like, not quite, like, I don't know if I want to say down to earth, but relatable at least, even if, like, he is set up to be one of the ruling elite, at least at the outset. But even then, even from that early point, it's made clear that he's having doubts, that he doesn't, again, like I said, he doesn't 100% buy in with blind faith versus the way that his boss Kroner does. Right? So, like, there's always that kernel, that spark, one of you mentioned, of like just doubt, like, is this the best system? And following through with his wife Anita, like that, their whole arc with that, and again his relationship to all his other coworkers and the whole Meadows scene / part, right? And then and where he arrives at both personally and related to, I guess, the masses or the revolution that he sort of reluctantly becomes the figurehead and or leader of, or at least co-leader in the council of. So yeah, I think it's all really well laid out. There's nothing that, to me, makes me question, like, well, why did he do this? What was his motivation here? I think Vonnegut draws him extremely well, and he hits all the points throughout as he weaves in and out of other people's lives and gets more and more drawn into, or pulled in different directions at least, if not drawn into any one specifically. And you can understand, like, what he's going through at any given point, given his circumstance at let's say the first third of the novel, and then the last, then the middle part, and then the last half. So, yeah, all that to say, everything you guys said, a really well done protagonist and quite excellently portrayed. So I'm giving him a 1.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you guys have said. I don't have much more to add to that. I think that Proteus was really well realized, and yeah, I'm going to give it a 1.
I just wanted to say Dr. Protagonist is all, just to make that joke, and I already did that, so there you go.
Okay, so it's 1s all around then?
Yeah.
I think so, sir.
Okay, and Steve-O, it's back to you with secondary characters.
All right, I have a couple that I want to touch on.
Okay.
I'm only going to do 2 because, like, some of the more meaty ones I want to leave for you guys, but I have 2 that I think are interesting. So Anita, his wife, first off, is this, like, very, like, he obviously doesn't understand her at all, and she's like explained completely through him, except for her reactions to him, which are he always doesn't know how she's going to react to things. I think it's very weird that, like, he's lived with her this. I think it's, like, intentional, of course, but like he's lived with her this long. They've been married for however long, and he has no idea what she actually wants and what she actually needs. And I think that's a really good, like, mini foil for him in this book, because she kind of, they have these rituals that they do, and outside of that, they don't know each other in the least. And honestly, I think she knows him better than he knows her. I think that's, she realizes when it's time to get out.
Yeah, it's somewhat bent to that. Yeah, I agree.
And the other one I want to mention is Epicac, the actual machine.
Secondary character, nice.
Right. So, like, this is the machine, like the vast machine that exists in the book, I assume it's a play on ipecac, the like poison that
That's what
makes
I got
you vomit, right?
out of it. Sure, yeah.
But I tried to do a little more research on it, and this so ipecac was like born in a short story from Welcome to the Monkey House by Vonnegut, which was published a little bit over 4 years after the world's first electronic general purpose computer, ENIAC, went online. ENIAC.
All right.
So like I think
Gotta be
that's
play on
really
that. Yeah.
that's really fantastic, like fascinating that like he took that and shortly thereafter, like that went online, and shortly thereafter he's like writing about how it's going to take over the world. Like he's basically doing Terminator shit about about this computer that just came online like 4 years earlier. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that and like bring a little bit of that up. So supporting characters in this are really strong. I'm going to give it a strong one. But
so I do want to talk about ipecac here, in that it's one of the more realistic portrayals of, I think, artificial intelligence. And obviously, like he's talking about vacuum tubes and all of that, which is what ENIAC was built upon. Yeah. But I think that they're talking about how the idea of optimal paths, which is what artificial intelligence is all about. But it's also about it's the limit of it is that it can only do the optimal path of the questions we ask
of the input it takes. Yeah,
and like there's one where the Shah is asking it a riddle to determine if it's the wisest thing. It's like, no, it just can't answer a riddle. We have to program it to do that. And I think that it's actually a very realistic portrayal of kind of one of the problems is because he's really focusing on the optimal path that these computers will take, but also that we can't escape the human frailty of knowing of being the humans who determine what the questions are.
Yeah.
But I like the Shah actually quite a bit as a observer and bringing up the early on when he's talking about these are slaves, like nah, citizens. Like, oh, that's your term for slaves. Like, no, they aren't slaves.
Yeah, they're trying desperately to impress him and explain to him the difference, if there is any. But yeah,
he continues to use that same word, and they just replace it with citizen and later.
It's again another like little level of satire there, Goody. Yeah.
But overall, I think that again this 1950s nerdy. If you think of like go back to like them, and this is the world ruled by those doctors who are strong chins, being like, well, the radiation attacks, and I think that it's such a well realized. But I just want to talk about Kroner for what that's the last thing I'll talk about here. In that I love this character for how, again, prescient it is of a person who doesn't really actually care about morality. He cares about civility. And he wants everything to be copacetic and not crass and not upsetting the apple cart. It doesn't really matter what the repercussions.
As long as we maintain our level. Yeah.
As long as everything is hunky-dory. And I feel that there's a large segment of the American populace who has that position right now, that we don't really care about the repercussions of our actions as long as it's civility first.
Yeah, I mean, so there's not a huge cast, but a decent amount of side characters and the secondary characters. And I like the fact of counting ipecac as one. I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's pretty sweet. But I think maybe I'll talk about my favorite one, which is Bud Calhoun, he's early on, he's dating Proteus's secretary, or is engaged with her. And like he's early.
Karen, was that her name?
Yes, but Catherine.
Catherine. Ah, right. I wanted her to be a Karen. That's why.
Yeah, of course you do. That's a separate meme.
It's a sexist term.
Yeah. But anyways, like I don't know, like
Karen.
There are many. Like I'm gonna save a bunch for you guys, other characters, but that's the one I want to focus on real quick. Is because I like the intro. Like he's like a good old like Southern boy, but yet he comes up with like very innovative ideas. And that's why he's part of one of the managerial elite until he comes up with a gadget that makes himself like basically makes himself redundant because he invented it. So now, like, he feeds it through the machine, and the machine
He
says,
and Rudy are basically similar characters,
Yeah.
where Rudy was the mechanic who they mimicked all of the actions on the program,
yeah.
and then he programs himself out of a job.
Yeah.
So it's I like that.
Exactly. I love the balance there, like the other dynamic there. So I think, and then of course, because of that, sort of, he shows up again as part of the Revolutionary Council, and like, like his mannerisms, I think, are quite amusing. But each of the side characters at least represents, again, sort of a facet of the themes we covered to get almost personified to sometimes. Like Kroner, for certainly, Kroner and Bayer, like together they create like an actual functioning human who can run this stuff. Right? That's an outright line in the novel. So like, and like sprinkled other characters like Luke Lubbock, I believe. Like I think he was a great character. So each one that he spends time with, that Vonnegut takes the time to flesh out with during chapters. Even the guy who's showing around, who's like basically the Shah's like ambassador.
His name Halyard, right?
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Like his little arc is again hilarious and satirically relevant as well. So of course, like the cast around this whole world, I think works extremely incredibly believably to build it all up, and they each have their own little moment to shine, and I'm giving them all collectively a pretty strong one. So
Agree.
Yeah, you guys kind of hit it most of what I was going to say, because I like the Shah and the slave thing, and I really like the scene with Shah.
Got to rephrase your words there, buddy.
The Shah and the slave thing, yeah.
No, the fact that he was a slave for everything, for workers and citizens, and they had to redo that. That, in other words, Ian, that was a point I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
I especially like that scene in the limo where the woman was basically going to prostitute herself, but he understood, so he gave her a ruby ring and
real nice guy. Real nice guy.
Yeah. But I wanted to bring up Haycock, the farmer.
Okay, yeah, nice.
This is a
Or
great
Haycock's.
character.
And the reason is because something I liked, because Paul at one point buys this little farmhouse because he's from the beginning has this idea of going out to the simpler life and living off of the land, and him hunting a bear, and this idealistic of roughing it. And then he goes to buy this house, and there's this caretaker there, and basically he doesn't want to be laid off. He's just like, basically, this is where my family have been taking care of this plan for all these years, and part of the will says you have to keep me on and all that stuff. And basically Paul's talking in terms of an ideal, and Haycock's like, no, this is shit work, but it's like, I love it.
Yeah.
And then after he quits, gets fired, he goes to the farm and works a day and doesn't ever go back.
Yeah. He sees how
I'm done with this shit.
Yeah, I like the fact that I think his character is great there to like kind of, because you think this is like, this is what he'll want to do.
Right. Well, he has an idealized version of like country living, and right, and then like versus the reality of like shoveling pig shit and like
Yeah, it's the
Green Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me.
but not for Paul Proteus.
but it is the urban ideal of the simpler life, so to speak.
Sure.
Like for me, I love mowing the lawn. I can't imagine living someplace where I couldn't mow the lawn. But I also
robots to replace.
You want to shovel cow shit though?
But no, I don't want to shovel shit, and I sure as hell don't. And I sure as hell hate shoveling the fucking snow.
All right.
So my whole point is that I really liked his character because I thought it brought out so much about Paul, but also so much about the aesthetic where all of us have these comforts, and it's like, well, if we really left off the land, because even when I go camping, I've got like this little boil thing that boils in 60 seconds. I'm like, I couldn't sit there and hold a cup over the fire, assuming you could have a fire. So it's like even my level of roughing it has a certain amount of comfort to it. So
sure, I'm just saying, like, they all represent facets of that, and they're all equally fully fleshed out characters unto themselves. So
yeah, so
Actually,
I'm giving them all
interesting is
one.
Marie Antoinette had a similar fascination with the idea of rustic living, and she actually built like a fake French village within, I believe, Versailles or one of the things in order to mimic
try to live like it.
Peasantry. And I feel that Proteus has a very similar thing. And basically, they end up in the same position. With the,
Yeah.
revolutionary.
Like, fuck that. I don't actually want to do peasant work. But yeah.
They both
The
got
one-
to eat their own cake.
Let them eat brioche.
Let the robots produce brioche for them to eat. Anyway, one for secondary, I think.
Ones.
Ones. And Ian, that brings you to dialogue, dude.
So there are moments I really enjoy. I like Vonnegut's stylings quite a bit. Although I feel this was more 50s science dialogue than other works he's done.
It shows its age a little bit here and there.
But
All of his stuff does to some degree.
Sure.
yeah, but I feel that this was it wasn't quite as memorable as
Snappy,
his
poppy,
later dialogue would be. But I do remember certain things, specifically when it came to which you mentioned this earlier, that the Shah was the least important part of the story, but that was the most memorable dialogue to me of the interpreter. I don't know how to say of this because we don't have this kind of American bullshit concept in our language. And so I might give it a 1 for that.
That's funny. I'm not giving it a 1. It might be a softer one versus the rest of the categories that we're talking about for this novel. But again, similar to what I said about themes, it's an early iteration of Vonnegut's progression, but I still think it's perfectly solid. And anything that's iffy about it is very few and far between. So yeah, certainly as he progressed and evolved as a writer, I think you can point to his later novels that had better dialogue than this. But that's not to say that Pale Piano does not have good dialogue as is. So
he mastered the art of repetition of ideas later on, such as see the cat, see the cradle, and so it goes, things like that, where it really kind of the kind of repetition hammers home the thing, which I think was lacking here.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I'm still giving it a fine 1, but just not maybe as strong versus the other questions. So that's all I'm saying.
I love his dialogue. You're right. His later works are probably better in terms of it, but Vonnegut has this way, throughout his career of speaking through his characters very in the slang of the day, in these weird, all the things you're not supposed to do, using current slang, or trying to write in accents, things like that. But Vonnegut has a way of making it work every single time he does it, and I have to give him full credit for that.
Yep.
A lot of times you'll see stuff like that where somebody speaks in an accent and I don't understand what the fuck they're talking about, or whatever it is, the writer doesn't make it work.
Lovecraft shouldn't have done it. Vonnegut's fine when he does it.
Vonnegut does it in a way that I think works for most, if not all, of his characters that he does it for. And on top of that, I think that the kind of philosophical things that he's trying to talk about in offhanded, in an offhanded way, works really well for his style, and I have to give him full credit for that as well. So I'm going to give him a 1.
Ian, I agree with you. I think the dialogue is kind of reminiscent of its time, but I haven't read as much Vonnegut as you guys have, but his dialogue has a certain flow to it.
Yeah.
And there's a level of sardonic
Absolutely.
that you can even if he doesn't say this character had this smirk or whatever, you get that the flavor's in there in the dialogue. I don't know how to describe it any more than a lot. When I think back in this novel, and I'm so happy to reread it, I may not have remembered the dialogue, but I remembered the tone of the conversation, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah, I got you.
point.
Yep, for sure.
So it's like me watching a silent movie, remembering the silent movie without the words. So I'm definitely giving it a 1. I mean, I don't know, compare it to much of his later work, but I mean, empirically, I think the dialogue's great.
It works in this instance. It's just that, again, on reflection upon his works as a whole, it's not to the heights that he reached later on, is all. But still a 1 here. So
1's all around, I think, right?
One's all around. Which, Scott, brings us to you with style.
Which is somewhat related, I suppose. Yes, of course, I'm giving it a 1. I don't see how you can't give Vonnegut a 1 in almost all instances, even if it isn't as strong. You can clearly see where we started, forming his unique style unto itself, and it still works as is in this isolated in this work of Player Piano. Now, granted, like I said, when you compare it, like when you look upon the reflection of all his works to come, it's not as good, but it still is good. And like it's very unique even still to this day, who, 40, 50, 60 years later, he's one of the greatest American authors, I would say, and still is known and respected as such. And I think for a reason, and the style works. I think it ties in sort of like a three tentpole thing between style, themes, and like maybe a little bit of dialogue as well, maybe characters, but all those form together. And he just has this sort of like almost effortless way of getting you from scene to scene, from character to character, with it being engaging, but without it feeling like a burden. Like in it's like you're being dragged through it. It's more like you're being guided through it. So yeah, like all that to say, I had to give his style, even his early formulation of it, a pretty solid one.
I'm actually going to do the opposite of you.
Is that right? Yeah.
I'm going to give it a 0 based on his later works. I think that it's a higher style than other authors I've seen, but I think that, as I said earlier on, I'm trying to compare this to the works of Kurt Vonnegut, and I've read about half, maybe more of his work, and aside from perhaps Galapagos, this is, I actually just really dislike Slaughterhouse-Five.
You dislike Slaughterhouse-Five?
Yeah, it's one of the, I know it's everyone's like first.
I feel it's overhyped. But,
it's one of the later ones I've read, but I really like Cat's Cradle's my favorite.
I agree with that.
Champions and things like that. I think that this is one of his more bland works, so I'm going to give it a 0 for that.
Like, I guess I can see that, but I'm trying to just compare it in isolation. But it's certainly fair to compare it to his, his whole string of works. But go, guys.
It's a interesting thing that you just did, Ian, because I was going to give this a 1, of course, because I think its style is good to very good. If I'm comparing it to Kurt Vonnegut, I don't know. Like, I've read Breakfast of Champions, amazing book. I've read, Cat's Cradle, incredible. I loved Slaughterhouse-Five. I thought the style that was really good. I know that maybe that wasn't your favorite one, but like, Slapstick, Jailbird.
That's a good call.
Dan I Dick, like, just
Sirens.
Galapagos.
Yeah, I haven't read Sirens of Titan yet, but
What did?
I haven't read Galapagos either, but this is probably the least impressed I've been with his style.
I can see that.
Which doesn't mean it was bad. Like
it's a comparative relative scale. Yeah, I get it.
Likely, I'm still going to give this a 1, but you're really making me rethink that, Ian, with your argument. Chris, what do you think?
I'm actually going to give it a 1, and here's why. Because the things that date this book are, as we said, some of the dialogue, and definitely the 1950s near futurism. I mean, but by the same token,
vacuum tubes to the
vacuum
moon.
tubes. It's like vacuum tubes are here, and then we get the 60s,
knobs and wires,
70s,
and lights and
everything
twiddles.
became atomic, and then we get past everything's quantum. But I really very much enjoy the casual nature of this 1950s future aesthetic. It's like when the book starts, I kind of definitely imagine post-World War II, 1950s, but the more things unraveled, there's this wonderful blandness about it, so to speak, because it's just kind of like, and I think that goes to the tone of the book, that everybody's kind of
I see what you mean.
Okay, we find out like towards the end, towards the last third of the book, that this is after World War III. So obviously there wasn't a nuclear war, but there was some kind of big war.
It's sort of like it's vaguely described, but never fleshed out. Yeah.
But it was a once again, a bigger nationalist push. So if you have like World War II is like a really huge nationalist push, that would be expanding upon it. So what I think he did rather simply, and I think this goes to the rest of the book, is that like, okay, he took a snapshot in time and used that, but everything is presented so simply that you can then pull things out and kind of interpret it to what it would be today. So like in my mind's eye, I have that that pre-nuclear war Fallout aesthetic in a weird way.
Mhm.
But by the same token, it really wasn't hard for me to visually at times cut and paste and put other stuff like that. And what would this look like in my mind's eye? What would it look like if you were telling the story today? What if you were writing it now?
I would love to see a film version of this set in the modern
Ooh,
era.
that'd be
I was
really cool.
thinking,
Yeah,
how
me
we would
too.
update certain aspects of it.
No.
Me too. But because in such a simple,
Especially
dated,
with the idea of the moose and elk lodges and
All that shit. Yeah, true.
the people dressed as Arabs, very much all back 50s style bored white people.
yeah. Definitely. But I have to give it a 1 because
The Masons didn't show up for the
Yeah,
war.
like late again as usual, or whatever they said. Yeah. Obviously, they fucking slacked. Yeah.
that was absolutely brilliant. But because even given a snapshot, even though it is dated, so to speak, because it's such a it's like a coloring book before you color it in a lot of ways. But because it evoked so much while I was reading it, it allowed you to fill in a lot of the gaps, even if like the passion play was very, very, very
That's one of my favorite
precisely
parts.
Yeah. But like the rest of the book, everything is kind of like told to you like laissez-faire, kind of like everybody. There's like this national ennui happening, and I think that his style, even if it may have been because it was his first novel, because maybe he's just getting his feet wet, whatever the reason that this novel is the way it is, I found it provocative for as simple as it was. So I'm going to give it a 1.
You almost got me to reconsider E. Like it's a really close call, but I'm still sticking with a softer one than originally, but still a 1 at the end of the day because it still is his style, even if it's an early iteration. But you made me think about it for a bit.
I'm also
Right
going to
there.
the 1 just because Chris, you reminded me that I love the futurism angle of this and like the idea of I like a lot of times when people are going with a futurism angle. I mean, this is probably predates even the term futurism, but like,
Yeah.
it's the idea of like trying to see what's going to happen based on what is happening now, and I always like that, and I think it comes through pretty well in this book.
Hey, and everybody drives an electric car too.
Sure.
Yeah, still hasn't happened yet.
Waiting on that.
I'm still sticking with my 0 for this.
And I don't
fair
begrudge you. I see it.
And that leaves me with recommend, and I highly recommend it for everything we've discussed up until now.
Yeah, I mean, so technically it was your choice, I think, sort of. Or was it your choice? I can't remember now. I thought it was yours. But yeah, so it's been a while since I've read Play Piano, and while, again, as we said, not perhaps the pinnacle of Vonnegut's work, which there are, that's saying a lot because he had a very storied and very well-decorated career, I still think it is worth reading. It has a lot to say, relevant, as we said, thematically, certainly impactful, and I still would certainly recommend it pretty much without thinking easily.
So I wonder if there's a cycle for like every 70 years or so we go through a crisis of automation. Saboteur comes from
I wait for you to bring that up.
French loomists as punch cards were taking over automating looms. They would throw their sabots, the wooden clogs, into the machinery to break them. And I mean, I guess during the 50s there was that fear of that, and nowadays we have that fear of that too. So it's I think even more, it's timely in a strange sense for being a futurist, a dated futurist.
A DRS futurist.
But I think that it does bring up a lot of issues we're still facing today. Although it's weird because I think that this would be, I would recommend. Who's clicking?
Sorry.
There is there's a couple more Vonnegut novels I would recommend over this.
Yeah, for sure. I don't disagree with that.
For the most part, I'm going to give it 1.
Well,
yeah, I would agree with that. There are other Vonnegut novels I would recommend over this, but this one, based on its themes, specifically deals with certain things that I think some of the other ones don't, and I think that it is well worth a read. It's not super long. It's like a 300-page book. You know,
Yeah.
as far as novels go, it's a average or
Very
less.
palatable.
And yeah, give it a read. I think it was very solid. I would recommend it. That's it.
Actually, there's a very good audiobook on YouTube. Which
Good version,
I was
yeah.
switching between reading it and listening to it over the past couple of days.
Oh, very nice. Yeah.
Nice.
so check it
Maybe we'll
out.
post that up.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
Where does it leave us, buddy?
It leaves us with a score of 8.75.
I think that's pretty damn solid for Vonnegut's initial novel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we all came in agreement on plot. We all gave it a 2 for various similar reasons. The only thing was style, where Ian gave it a 0. So Scott gave it a softer 1, and I think there's Ian and me, and everybody kind of fell between. But other than that, I think we all
You
said it.
German bastard.
Jesus.
Jesus.
But
Ian
German
was throwing
engineering
the bow into the score.
helps out. Yeah.
But yeah,
Anyway.
I think we all agree it's a worthwhile read, and that it still has a lot to say even now.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, does anybody have anything else to say?
I think we said it all.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I have been Chris Morgan here with Stephen Ramosi,
I and my plague beard bid you adieu.
Jonathan Ian Manzer,
Chris, your headlight's broken.
and holding the wrench to us all is Scott Thurlow.
I am the monkey in your wrench. Good night. We'll see you next time.
Good night.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.